Three, two, one. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode on The Long with FVR. Today we have Dr. Ferguson. Thanks for doing this.
Thanks, Fabian. It's always great to connect with a fellow Houstonian, and I'm happy to be here.
Thank you, man. So we were discussing about many things before to start the recording about how good it would be to start to show off part of the infrastructure here in this building. Tell us about this building because it has a story.
Yeah, this building is interesting. I think they broke ground on it in 2016, and it's really the Death Star of business schools, right? And so, I've worked in other business schools in the region, and I've never been in a facility quite as grand and impressive as this. You've lived in America, and this is a reference I think an American can get, but this building can hold 6 Walmarts inside from a square footage perspective. We have the ground level, that is for our entrepreneurship and innovation center. We have the workout facilities. The first level is where we have our events, our main auditorium and everything, and our cafeteria, restaurant. Second level and third level are for classes. The fourth level is where the faculty offices are. And the fifth level is the dean's suite, and where we do our board of governors meetings, etc. So it's a very grand facility, and I feel blessed to have the opportunity to work here all the time.
That's impressive. For people who are still trying to figure out where we are right now, we are in the Kuala Lumpur area, capital of Malaysia, and this is the building for the ASCI School of Business in collaboration with MIT Sloan. And you mentioned that before you were doing business schools in other places.
Yeah.
So tell us a little more about yourself.
Yeah, so once upon a time I was just like you, a first-year MBA student at Rice University. Before that, I was working at Procter & Gamble. Like you, I was an engineer. Before coming to business school, my bachelor's was in electrical engineering. And I went to Rice, got my MBA there, and after MBA, I went into management consulting for Capgemini Ernst & Young, working in their strategy and transformation practice. And then after that, I went into the technology industry as a product manager, making pricing and revenue optimization software. And one of the things that I always have been looking for is to make impact on society. And the MBA experience at Rice for me had a transformational impact on me. And one of the things that a lot of my mentors have said, if you find something that you have passion about, you'll be exceptional at it. And I really believe in the nature of management education as far as business schools being a place where leaders are created, and they're effectively leadership factories. So when the opportunity came up, this was about 4 or 5 years after I graduated from Rice, the director of MBA program position was open. And I was like, oh, that seems like it'd be a cool role. I had no idea, like 17 years later, I'd be here, Kuala Lumpur, senior associate dean. I thought it'd be something cool to do at the time, but it's really kind of been my calling. And it's been a great opportunity. After Rice, I worked there for 8 years, did a lot of things. And I was at a point where I felt like I had made all the impact that I could make there. But I didn't know, I didn't want to go work at a competitor school or a U.S. business school who we had fought tooth and nail with. And I wound up going, Korn Ferry reached out to me about the opportunity at Hong Kong, at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology to be the associate dean there. And I felt like, wow, this is so totally different. And being, a product of immigrant parents, right? I thought, I've had family, my family's from Jamaica. And so they went to school all over the world, the UK, the US, wherever. And so it wasn't so native to kind of leave your home to go somewhere else for opportunity. And when the Hong Kong opportunity presented itself, I talked to my wife about it, and she said, we both agreed that if we don't do this now, we'll never do it. Our kids were young enough at the time, they were 6 and 9. We thought this would be a transformational experience for them. And so we made the move. We left Texas and came to Hong Kong. We were there for 5 years. And then after about 5 years, we were wondering, things had kind of run their course for me in Hong Kong. And we were wondering what's next. And then I met Rhoda Yap, our former COO and career director. And I was telling her what was going on. I was like, well, we're thinking about going back to the U.S. or doing something different. And she's like, you should consider ASB, right? and she connected me with Charlie, the dean and president, and Loredana. And Loredana called me. It was like a December, and she was like, "Hey, you have to come to Kuala Lumpur, right?" And I came for a symposium to see all the action learning. And long and short of it, this is when we were over in the old building at Sasana Kijang. The symposium was amazing. The students were amazing. I was like, wow, this is a really international group, a great business school, at a great facility. And so I was just like, hey, this is a great situation. And so, checked it out. And then now I've been here for 4 years, and it's been great recruiting students like yourself who are amazingly talented, who have this kind of frontier mindset and really want to kind of impact the world, right? I think one of the things that's really been great about working in Asia is that versus, say, the US, is like the opportunity set is much wider for MBAs out in this part of the world. It's not as clear, right? So there's a little bit more risk, right? There's not this big MBA machine, but the students who come in here have this kind of frontier mindset, that in the US we used to talk about this in the early 1900s, where they say, go west, young man or woman. That's where the opportunity is. And I think for us here in Asia, the mantra is like, go east, young man or woman. This is where the opportunity is. And we firmly believe here that, Asia, it's the world's largest economic region, and it's the predominant driver of global growth. And people who want to build a global career, this is the best place to do it.
Those are very insightful words, and I remember during your explanation, before to coming here, you spent many years in a space city. I believe you also spent some years before going to Houston.
Yeah.
Where was that?
So I was after I graduated from undergrad, I worked in Georgia for Procter and Gamble at one of their paper facilities, and at the time, it was the world's largest tissue towel paper facility, right? And just for context and reference, a paper machine roughly costs $250 million to build, right? And so at the time, we were going through one of the largest expansions ever for the facility I was at. It was in Southwest Georgia, and it was an amazing experience. I was on the converting side as a process engineer, and then got promoted to reliability manager, and it was a great experience. And my time at Procter and Gamble was probably one of the more influential elements to my managerial style as a leader. Procter & Gamble does a great job of helping you how to think with data, things like emotional maturity, presence, managerial savvy, all those kind of smart skills that Professor Loredana talks about are kind of fundamental to the development and training there. And, it was so formative for me. A lot of those lessons still carry on with me today here. I'm from Detroit originally, and so, I grew up on the west side of Detroit, and, I used to want to be the mayor of Detroit because, at that time when you're 18, 19, 20 years old, I always had this kind of civic mindset, community mindset. I wanted to do something of impact, but you don't really know when you're 18, 19, 20, all the ways you can impact the world. And so for me, it's like the things you're familiar with. So yeah, I want to be the mayor of the city of Detroit. And I think the lesson I take away is that sometimes it's not the exact thing you want to do, but it's more the elements of the thing that you want to do that kind of can help you figure out your calling and your path in life. And so when I think about where I'm at today, it wasn't that I wanted to be the mayor of Detroit. I wanted to impact people in a positive way that made the world better. And when I think about what I do in management education, I don't know if you've seen my tagline on LinkedIn. It's connecting global talent and opportunity by scaling management education in the emerging world. And so making an impact on society is what I'm always looking to do. And so I didn't know that I'd be working at business schools at 47 years old, but it makes sense based on the things I thought I wanted to do in the past.
So you mentioned back in your time in Detroit, Michigan, did you happen to see RoboCop?
RoboCop.
Did you meet him?
I did not meet RoboCop, but it was funny because I remember seeing RoboCop, and for us, every city gets a sense of pride when their name is mentioned and that kind of thing. But as a Detroiter, and this is why I wanted to be the mayor of Detroit, because I always felt like people didn't appreciate what was great about Detroit. in the early 80s, it was called the
Motor City?
Murder City, right? So it was a kind of play on Motor City from, the Motown heritage. And, I thought Detroit was great, right? And, then you see RoboCop, and the portrayal wasn't the most flattering. And then you look at the buildings, you're like, that's not Detroit. And when I moved to Houston and Texas, I was like, man, all that was shot in Dallas or in Houston.
Yeah,
and
that's
so,
true.
Yeah, so I was like, it's not the best representation of the city, but I remember it, and those negative kind of portrayals of the city were really something that motivated me to want to, give back and be a part of, things that could help me change the city. And I don't know if you've ever seen the shirt Detroit versus Everybody.
Yes.
Yeah, those shirts are really a tribute to people not giving us our respect and that kind of thing. And so Detroiters are a special type, and everywhere we go, we kind of make an impact, and we influence culture. And the city has such a rich history, from World War II, the arsenal of democracy, using that manufacturing capability to power the U.S. to victory in World War II, and then the cultural influences of the city of Detroit. Motown. Those songs are still played today, and it's a techno hub in the world as far as techno music. And it has, I think, the largest Arab population in the United States, right? So it's got this crazy diversity and everything, and the people. It's a working class town. People, the people are great, super authentic and everything, and so I always carry that part of my history with me wherever I go.
It's true about the pride of Detroit, because I remember, if you go with an import card, don't dare to pass by Detroit, because they will throw stones. Like, why are you there to buy a foreign machine when you literally have domestic machines here?
Yeah.
And it's like, the sense of pride. But talking a little more into the personal view, how was growing up in Michigan? And how different is when you see your kids growing up in Houston?
Yeah, so I think it's one of the things in the North, and Detroit's no different, is that it can be kind of segregated, right? And so, in the city of Detroit, it's like 90% African American, and you can go long stretches of time without seeing a white person growing up, right? Or anybody of diversity. And that, on some hands, that was, I think that was really great, because I think the African American experience in the United States is a challenging one, but in these places like Detroit or Washington, D.C., where they have these large African American communities, you get taught about culture that you wouldn't get taught about in other parts. And so, for us, like when I was at school, Black History Month, it was a big deal, but it wasn't, because all throughout the year we were exposed to African Americans who had positively impacted society in the U.S., right? Who were inventors, and pioneers, who made the cotton gin, the stoplight, peanut butter, all these kind of things. And so we always had a pride in African Americans, and we always knew that sometimes the story of America didn't accurately portray or represent the contributions of African Americans. And it's the same for Mexican Americans, Chinese Americans. America, it's a nation of immigrant, it's a multicultural nation, and it's not a nation like, it's not an ethnic nation, right? It's a nation of ideas and concepts, personal liberty and all that. And I think, growing up in Detroit, having to see that, you had a lot of pride for your culture, and so it was a great experience, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. If you think about the civil rights movement, Detroit was at the center of a lot of that, in the 60s. And so I was always really appreciative of that. And, comparing that to Houston and my kids' existence, I lived in Houston, I lived in Georgia. It's not as segregated, right? And so, black and white people tend to live closer together, but it doesn't mean everything was always, cool. When I lived in Albany, there's definitely tensions, right? And in Houston it was different because, and that was the first place I lived that didn't feel like it was either black or either white, right? I think right now Latinos in Houston probably make up the largest portion of the population, mostly Mexican American or of Mexican heritage. But there's folks like you from Ecuador there and other parts of Latin America, and black people make up about 25 to 30% of the population, and white folks make up a good portion. And I think like outside the coast, Houston has like the most Asians, right? Largest, I think, Latino population, and so it was a really great place, and I think that's where I really got exposed to the broadness of diversity, right? And the way that I think Houston is probably one of the best examples of how America is changing, right? As far as its representativeness. And there was this faculty member at Rice. He does this kind of population studies. His name is Steve Kleinberg. And he just talks about how Houston is kind of the role model for where America is going from a diversity perspective, from a youth perspective, and that kind of thing. And I really enjoyed my time in Houston, the experiencing of so many different cultures there. It's the largest minority-majority city in the United States, and people are always shocked by that, but I'm like, yeah, it's crazy diverse. And after New York, it has the second most foreign consulates, because the oil and gas industry, where you came from, is a super global industry, right? And so I think it has the second most Fortune 500 companies. So it's amazing cultural, business, commercial town. And when I went to Houston and Rice, my wife was from there. And we met at the University of Michigan. And I was reluctant to move there, but we were trying to co-locate for our dual career. And it was, I was like, Texas? Like, up north, people look at Texas like, oh, I don't know about that place. But it was a great place, and I happily call it one of my homes in the U.S. And between there and Detroit, I've always got family, and I got much love for those two cities.
Absolutely. I still remember very clear the articles that is a minority majority.
Yeah.
And it's true, even in the workforce or even in the normal population, you see a lot of diversity going on. Back in my time when I was co-leading the Gulf Coast section of the Society of Petroleum Engineers, you see people from different backgrounds, from different origins, just getting things together to raise money for the scholarships in science and technology. But even more important was how, despite the differences, they knew there was a common page to, okay, let's do these things together, which was always very important for the people who will come after us. That was a good experience when we discussed about the difference of the cover, but the content always collaborate to a very nice common goal. Talking about common goals and talking about things that have been passing by time from time, how do you see right now the state of the industries of MBAs? Because it's like a competition, especially here in this region.
Yeah. So the MBA industry is fascinating, and I have this long view of basically since I graduated from undergrad in 1996, it was something I always wanted to do. As an engineer, graduating from Michigan, I knew I could be a good engineer, but I was very active in the National Society of Black Engineers, the University of Michigan Engineering Council, and I was a resident advisor. And what I saw is that my leadership skills to mobilize people and get things done, were stronger than my technical skills. I could be a good engineer, but I felt like I could be a great leader. And so when I was looking at companies, I was looking at like Procter & Gamble because they had a reputation for developing managers, right? And I was looking at GE, and I thought MBA programs would be the best thing to help develop me as a person, to be the most impact-oriented kind of professional that I could. And so I've been following MBAs for a long time, following rankings. I think when I did my dissertation for my doctoral degree, a lot of it was about rankings, benchmarking, and the overall marketization of higher education, and then also MBAs and management education more specifically. And I think the industry has been going through a kind of significant evolution. So when I went to school in 1999 to get my MBA. You know, it was a full-time MBA program, and back then, that was the most widely accepted model, right? There were part-time MBAs, but they didn't have the same kind of prestige, right? And so full-time MBA, that was the way. And the job market was zooming, you know, we were going, the dot-com boom was kind of at its peak. And then, you know, I got a job in management consulting, and the economy was slowing down when I was graduating, and so the consulting firms had pushed back start dates. So I graduated in May, and some of my friends who went to other consulting firms had their start dates pushed back until January of the next year. Unfortunately, I was able to start on September 10th, 2001. And this is a long story. They're like, you asked me about MBAs, I'm getting there. All right, I'm taking the kind of scenic route, but wanted to paint the picture. You know, I started on September 10th, 2001, right? My first day at Capgemini. We were in Pennzoil building and in downtown Houston. And next day was 9/11, right? And so with the deceleration of the dot-com boom and 9/11, what you had happen was, as the economy was decelerating, kind of heading to a recession, it just went down fast, right? And what you had after the classes after mine, 2002, 2003, 2004, the hiring environment for MBAs got really, really tough, right? And so what you had was, you had people at the time going into business school. It was always guaranteed that your salary was going to improve on coming out of business school, you know. And what happened that wasn't the case anymore. And so what you saw was a pivot by a lot of the market, especially, so for me it was fine because when I went to business school I only had 3 years of work experience. So it was still a pretty good ROI. But for people who had 6, 7, 8 years of work experience, right, it wasn't as much of a guarantee that you would improve, and you may have to retrench, right? And so what happened was full-time MBA programs started to decline, right, as far as enrollment. And what you had happen was, and I'll use Rice as an example, for my class we had 3 cohorts, and you know, we were anywhere from 150 to 180 students, right? But because the market declined, what schools started doing was saying, okay, we're going to go to 2 cohorts, right? And we went to 100, 120 students, right, in order to meet the market. And so a lot of that capacity was shifting over to part-time programs, EMBA programs, etc. Rice is one of the last programs to launch, one of the last top schools to launch a part-time program. And we were struggling because we didn't have a presence in the part-time market, because that was the market that was growing. Because people were like, look, if I'm making $80,000 or $90,000, I'm not going to quit that job to potentially make $120,000. But if it's in a poor economic environment, I might have to take a job for $75,000. So, you know, the risk-reward calculus was out of whack. And so more people were going to part-time programs. But what was happening in the part-time program space around 2000, you know, the 2000s, was that there was this kind of premiumization effort, right? And so what we were doing at Rice, we were thinking like maybe we should launch a part-time program. And there was a lot of reluctance to do it. Rice is one of these Southern Ivies, and people were like, hey, that's part-time is not with our brand, right? But you know, I definitely was like, we should do a part-time program, but we need to do it a right way, in a premium kind of way, similar to our EMBA and our full-time MBA. So we launched a full-time MBA program right around there was a concept of launching this part-time MBA program right around the time when I got there. And at the time, I didn't know anything about part-time programs, but I was like, man, I hope if they are looking for someone to lead this opportunity, I have a vision for it. And so I was like, we're going to make this a premium program. We're not going to call it part-time, right? Because by nature, part-time is a pejorative term, right? Mm-hmm. Less than. And so we called it the MBA for Professionals program, similar to what we're calling our Working Professionals program here, geared towards high potential working professionals who want to continue to accelerate their career and are not looking for as much of a significant change career-wise, right? So you might be in the energy industry on the engineering side, but maybe you want to switch over to the finance side, right, or something like that. Or maybe you're in the tech industry on the HR side and you want to move into marketing in tech, right? So it's you want to still accelerate and grow, but you're not a school teacher who wants to become an investment banker like what we would see in the full-time side, right? And so that part-time market has really grown, and over the last, I would say since like 2010, we've seen the explosion of online programs. And so what's happened in management education is that rather than having these big full-time programs, schools have had to create a portfolio of programs in order to grow revenue. So it's part-time programs, working professional online programs, different kinds of EMBA programs, specialized MBAs in healthcare or energy, specialized masters for pre-experienced people. So maybe someone who has a liberal arts degree can't really find a job in business, so they go to this one-year master's program, so they get some business training on top of an undergraduate degree. And so management education has really exploded. And what we've seen in the trend of management education today is that, there's more executive education, certificate programs, just-in-time training that may not be degree-oriented, but can help you really quickly develop a skill set that'll help you pivot or continue to kind of stay relevant and current with what's going on in the workforce and what you need from an employability perspective. So.
It's such a segmented way to not only address the industry, but also to see which are the things that need more work and the other ones that can be reliable on themselves. Talking about that, which has been the biggest challenge you have been seeing like in the last 24 months?
So, I think the biggest challenge has been uncertainty, right? And so we have this super compelling and unique value proposition here at the Asia School of Business with our experiential learning module and really being on the frontier of the emerging world, right? Here in Asia. And we feel like this is what really contributes to the transformative experience that we have here. And in our first two classes, last year we did our first survey of our graduating alums, and we're about to do another one. And the results were fantastic, right? We were seeing like annualized salary growth in the 15% range, promotion rates of 80%, within 3 years of graduation. And typically when, at the other schools I've been at, the promotion rate within 3 years of graduation is about 50%. So when you're talking about 80% versus 50%, and then I talked about the annualized salary growth of 15%, where most times it's between 3 and 5%. We felt like, wow, we've got something special here. And COVID has, I think it's set a lot of schools back. But if our value proposition was like this, and other schools was like this, it kind of brought our value proposition closer to parity with some other schools. But at the same time, being a startup, I think it's created some opportunities. We're naturally agile and kind of innovative, and so it's allowed us opportunity to explore some other things here. And I think providing certainty has been the biggest challenge for us because in Asia, Asia has handled COVID a lot differently than, say, Houston, Texas, where you and I are from, right? It's been more restrictive, more collective in their approach. Masks are still required, and we're socially distanced here, so we're good. We're good to go, but, vaccination, right? We have all of our vaccination status on our phones here. And so just a much more cautious and conservative approach to things, which has not allowed for a lot of labor mobility and some of the things that made Asia really dynamic going into the pandemic. And so that's been a challenge because those were the differentiators that we had relative to the US or European markets. And without that kind of dynamism and mobility in this market, I think it made people say, well, maybe I'll just go to the US, maybe I'll just opt out because there's too much uncertainty. And we were on the verge of, for the class of 2021, yeah, or was it 2022? 2022, right? The ones that are about to graduate, we were on the verge of having our largest class ever, 70 students, and 50, and our previous high had been like 45, so that's like 75% growth. And we wound up only bringing in about 50, 55 students because of visa issues or people deferring because they weren't sure about their family situation and everything like that. And so that slowed down our enrollment momentum. We still had our largest class in COVID, but it was just different. And then I think the uncertainty and the spiking back up. I mean, there's been multiple stages. Right before when the vaccine first came out, right before Delta last year, we felt like, all right, things are getting to normal, and then Delta zoomed up, and now with Omicron, that created some uncertainty. But I think what's happened is that the way that Malaysia's handled COVID here, well, sometimes it could have been potentially frustrating here. The boosters and everything, while cases now are as higher than they've ever been, the ICUs, the death rates are low, and so the public health system is not taxed. And so next week they're opening the borders, and we're really excited about the opportunity to bring our international students in and really have this kind of return to MBA experience. For those action learning projects that we're doing, we've had people now starting to do projects in Thailand or Vietnam again. And so, and we just got done taking the second years to the MIT immersion that we usually do, and the Masters of Central Banking program, they got back from their immersion. And your group is going to get to go on April 15th, and so we're excited about that. And so we're super pumped about delivering the full experience, because we feel like it's the most transformative MBA experience out there. And we feel like we're preparing you guys to be globally oriented, impact-minded, frontier-minded individuals who are going to affect change in the world.
Those are very remarkable words. Talking about what is the global experience and also what is the local experience, in my case, I realized the little details. For example, when you go to a restaurant, they will usually give you a fork and a spoon instead of a knife, unless there is a harder meat to cut.
Yeah.
So which have been the small details you have seen compared to, let's say, Hong Kong or other places?
So Malaysia is interesting because it's kind of a melting pot and a convergence of all the major cultures in Asia, right? So you have the Malay, which are kind of the indigenous Southeast Asians, right? And then you have Indians who are here, who were brought, through the British Commonwealth system here to Malaysia, and then the Chinese who came here to kind of work the plantations back in the day, and they've stayed here. And so it kind of brings all those together. So Malaysian culture is a fusion of a lot of different things, right? And so I think the fork and spoon thing is definitely a Southeast Asia thing. But, coming from Hong Kong and Chinese culture being prevalent here, chopsticks are very commonplace as well. And then, in Malaysia, there's a lot of, when you eat banana leaf, you eat it with your hands, right? And so it's just always kind of fascinating. Whenever I bring someone here, and someone comes to visit, first they see all these modern skyscrapers in front of us and behind us, and then they see the kind of cultural kind of fusion and character and spice that's here, and they're like, man, this is super cool. Whereas Hong Kong is great. It's a super vibrant city, very cosmopolitan, and there's kind of like two Hong Kongs, right? There's kind of maybe even three Hong Kongs, right? So there's the Hong Kong kind of Cantonese-oriented culture there of the locals, right? And then there's there's this increasing presence of individuals from mainland China who are working there, because like Hong Kong is kind of China's window to the world. So I think the order of magnitude of IPO investment in Hong Kong is incomparable in the world. And so, you have a lot of people in mainland China who come work down there. And then you have this big expat community that's a bubble of kind of all these different things. So, like, people don't know it, right? But I think, like, the largest expat community in Hong Kong are the French, right? And so there are a lot of Americans and Canadians, but a lot of them are, like, maybe American-born Chinese or Canadian-born Chinese, right? Or they have passports from there. And so it's a great fusion. The thing that was really cool about Hong Kong is that you see it on TV, it's a concrete jungle, everything looks vertical, but it's one of the most natural places you've ever been. And so I think 60% of Hong Kong is green space, right? Because of the mountains, it's expensive to build on mountains, so that's why where you can build up, it's very vertical. And so we live right by a beach in Hong Kong. There's all these places to go hike. And so it was an awesome experience living there. Food was amazing. You had world class of everyone's food there. And so we really enjoyed it there. Malaysia's been amazing. I'm a big fan of Southeast Asia. When I was in Hong Kong before I moved here, Southeast Asia was my favorite place to go because the beaches here are awesome. You know, the price to value ratio is off the charts. And so it's one of my favorite parts of the world. And I kind of can add Hong Kong to the list with Houston and Detroit and Kuala Lumpur in Southeast Asia where you just kind of feel at home with everything. So.
Yeah, it's very fascinating that you mentioned that Hong Kong is not all the vertical things, but also has a lot of green, even mountains.
Yeah.
So I bet if you can recall in your memory, before our chat, I was in a lunch club talk with Joseph Lau, who was a student and also a former MBA in the Hong Kong University. He recalls that you were also on that program.
Yeah.
And he also tells the tales of different Hong Kongs. Because this is something that can also be applied here in Kuala Lumpur. Because you only see the pictures and you only see one part, but another different thing is when you actually live there. Surprising for him was how walking distance, like 10 minutes, and he was already from the city in mountains.
And you know, like, so I lived on the campus of HKUST, which was basically built on the side of a mountain in 1991, right? And I lived on the 7th story of the place is called Senior Staff Quarters for senior leadership and faculty. And I was on the 7th floor of an apartment, no, the 5th floor of a 7-story apartment building that was probably 30 stories from the sea. And we had a view that overlooked the sea, and it was just breathtaking, right? And so we would, you know, my wife and I, we would sit on the patio, maybe have some wine, look out at the South China Sea, we see the boats and the junks, you know, floating around. And it almost didn't feel real when we were out there, you know? But then you come to KL, right, and it's like, it's a totally different vibe, you know, like the street food scene here is amazing. I think in some ways KL is easier because the English here is actually, I think people don't appreciate it, but it's actually better than Hong Kong, right? And so, like when I would get into a taxi in Hong Kong, I feel like KL is more kind of culturally aligned with the United States, right? And so I get into a car here in KL, and you know, you might hear some Justin Timberlake or you know whoever, right? You know, so it would sound like just like a top 40 station in the U.S. or something. In Hong Kong, you get into a taxi there, you hear some, you know, you hear a Cantonese song or something like that, or it's very kind of Hong Kong Chinese, right? And that was interesting in its own right as well. And so, and I just think, you know, these experiences represent the multiple sides of Asia. I think a lot of times in the U.S., people kind of think of China and Asia as coextensive. Well, Asia means China to some people. Maybe India means China, but there's so many layers, and it's an amazing mosaic in this part of the world. And it's, you know, now I've been here for 9 years, and it's just been an amazing experience. You know, obviously I've had great opportunities professionally working at great schools, Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, ASB. But I think as much as I've grown professionally, personally I've grown even more. And you know, I think you know, when you come from the U.S., Americans, we're like we're the best, right? But it's been an amazing experience because it's helped me appreciate what is great about the U.S., but it's also helped me appreciate what is great about the rest of the world.
That's very insightful words. Talking about what has been your experience, 9 years here, now as we move forward, it will be unfair to ask about the long-term vision because volatility and uncertainty is always a factor. But what about the plans for summer? What plans do you have for that?
So for the summer, so my son, my oldest son, he's going to college. He's going to Duke. So I'm probably going to.
Congratulations.
Yeah, we're excited about that. When I went to the University of Michigan, the Fab Five was there, and we hated Duke, and so when our son said,
for obvious reasons.
Yeah, for obvious reasons, right? Everyone hates Duke, but you know, we were excited. We're like, hey, a great school. You know, we want to be supportive, so we'll help him do that. And every summer I go back to Houston just to get reacclimated with you know, the United States and home. This summer, right now, like today, it's a Saturday, and usually on Saturdays I come to work to do coaching. I dedicated to career sessions with our students, first and second year students, and I just had a couple of meetings with students about their summer internships, and it's not as straightforward here in Asia, right? Because it's not a big mass market MBA hiring market. In the U.S., right, the example that I like to use, the U.S. is kind of like the Rangers. They're getting battalions of special forces for the business community. Here in Asia, it's kind of like the Navy SEALs. It's much smaller, more specific kind of opportunities for folks. And there's still plentiful opportunities, but it's not as straightforward. So we got to be a little bit more hands-on and bespoke and strategic with how we find those opportunities for our students.
Absolutely. It's like when people are trying to trade,
Yeah.
they usually want to go for the ones that are usually most expensive.
Yeah.
And it's like they always are searching for the next one. And you always know there is a good stock, but nobody talks about it.
Right.
Once it begins to be talking about it, it's already overpriced or
Yeah.
it's already past the chance to make the money. So if you have the chance to go and apply, you will have a lot of experiences going on. Before we forget, any piece of advice will you give to your younger self? Because reflecting on 10 years here, or even the time you got back in Houston or back in Detroit, any piece of advice you will give to that young Sean Ferguson down there?
Yeah, you know, sometimes I think kind of just be prepared, right? Because you can't really, if I think about the times I've tried to say, I want to go into this direction, you know, it never works out the way you think. But if you're prepared, you can capitalize on opportunities when they present themselves, right? And so the story, and I think being engaged, right? And not always doing something just because you think you will get something out of it. And one of the things I've seen in this business is that MBA students sometimes think about the economic benefit of everything too much instead of just doing the right thing and contributing and leading, right? Well, I'll do this if I get that, right? And I think if you have that mindset, you'll miss out on opportunities. And a good example of that is that, you know, I've always been involved in industry organizations, right? And, you know, as a volunteer or that kind of thing. And, you know, I don't know what I was thinking, but we were doing a lot of rankings work at Rice. And I'm like, well, we want to share this, right? Because we were having some success. And so I submitted this proposal to present on rankings, right? And the proposal, it was like using strategic program management, using rankings to kind of focus your program. And it was to AACSB, the Global Accreditation Organization. And they were like, oh, we like your proposal. Would you be interested in presenting with an international school? And so the person from the international school now we're good friends, Steve DeCray, right? He was the associate dean at HKUST. He went on to be the president of the Asian Institute of Management. And in this presentation, he and I were working together, and he went to HKUST, you know, when it was still in the startup phases, just kind of like I came to ASB. And he told such a great story about HKUST. I was like, man, I would love to work at HKUST at some point in time, right? And sometimes life foreshadows and you don't even know it, right? But you got to be prepared, right? You know, there's this phrase, if you stay ready, you don't have to get ready, right? Mm-hmm. And so I prepared for this presentation with him. I learned all this stuff about HKUST because he was telling it, and you know, we wound up becoming friends and everything. And then this was like maybe 2010, okay? Then the next year, I led a study trip to Hong Kong, right? And with my students at Rice, it was to China. We went to Beijing and Hong Kong. And in Hong Kong, I was like, it was our 10-year, my wife and I's 10-year anniversary trip, because we didn't do it the year before, which was our real 10-year anniversary. But I was like, hey, come with me on this trip. We had a spouses package, so students could also bring their spouses. I was like, hey, come with us on the trip, and we'll stay extra long. We'll stay a little bit longer in Hong Kong to kind of celebrate our 10-year anniversary. And that was such a transformational trip because we were like, man, Hong Kong is so awesome. We'd love to live here. Having no idea in 2 years someone would reach out to me about HKUST in Hong Kong. And like because of that experience, my wife had familiarity, which, whenever you're doing career stuff, you got to get buy-in from your spouse or partner. And so when the search firm called me 2 years later about an opportunity in Hong Kong, my wife was on board because she had experienced it. And they asked me, did I know anything about HKUST? And I knew everything about HKUST, at least at a level that would be beyond anyone else who's applying for the job. And I just kind of crushed the interview process. And so, being prepared, being engaged, not thinking about, well, if I do this presentation, it's more work or something like that, and what am I going to really get out of it? You just never know. Life foreshadows, but you don't know. And so, they have this saying, luck is when opportunity meets preparedness. And I think that's, just be engaged, contribute, be a part of something. I think good things will happen to you.
That has been such a nice piece of advice that we got right today, which is, I cannot find a better way to close this episode.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, Sean, for your time.
Thanks, man. Fabian, I really appreciate it. I was so glad when we got someone from Houston. I remember we were looking in the file, and I was like, Houston? And I was so happy when you came to the program because, you were doing well in the United States, but I was like, this guy has that frontier mindset, and it's been really good to have you in the program. And thanks for this podcast and all the work that you're doing here, leading the Finance Club and everything.
Thank you very much. And follow to that right there on the other side. See you when I see you.
All right, see you when we see you. Take care.